I decided to sell my husband's car 3 months after he passed. But when I opened the glove box to clean it out, I found a secret that took my breath away. The car had been sitting at the end of the driveway since the funeral, collecting pollen, collecting rain. I'd walked past it every day and told myself I wasn't ready. But February's heating bill came, and ready stopped being the point. So there I was, standing in the drizzle, spare key in my hand, telling myself it was just a car. I climbed in, closed the door. The air inside was stale, but underneath the staleness there was something else, cedar and leather, and something I couldn't name, but felt like a memory I hadn't chosen to keep. I sat there longer than I meant to. Then I reached for the glove box. Insurance papers, an old phone charger, a pair of sunglasses I'd been looking for since last summer. I pulled everything out, set it on the passenger seat, and ran my hand along the back corner of the compartment. My fingers closed around something small, a USB drive, plain black, one letter on the label, handwritten in ink that had smeared slightly, like whoever wrote it had been in a hurry, or had been nervous, or both. The handwriting wasn't Warren's. Warren's handwriting was precise, every letter standing at attention. This was something else entirely. I sat in the driver's seat with the rain tapping on the roof and that little drive sitting in my palm, and something moved through my chest that I still don't have a clean word for. Not fear, exactly. Not grief, exactly. The particular cold weight of a secret that has just decided it belongs to you. I didn't plug it in. Not yet. I just sat there, holding it, while the rain kept falling. My name is Diana. I'm 46 years old, and for 22 years I was the woman who kept everything running so quietly that nobody ever thought to ask if the engine needed anything in return. I tracked the household accounts, paid the insurance on time, every time, filed the tax returns, covered the months when Warren's billings ran slow, and there were more of those months than most people knew without ever making it a conversation. Warren used to call me his quiet engine. He'd say it with a smile, the kind of smile that's meant to feel like a compliment, and I'd let it land that way. I thought it meant he noticed. I thought it meant he was grateful. Looking back now, I think it just meant he knew I'd keep running without supervision. The drive sat on the kitchen counter for a full day before I touched it. I walked past it, maybe 20 times, made coffee, did a load of laundry, stood at the window watching Jade's school bus pull away and wondering what her face looked like under that hood she'd been wearing for 3 months, like a shield. Grief at 17 is its own closed room. I'd been knocking softly on that door since November. She hadn't opened it yet. What finally got me to open Warren's laptop wasn't courage. It was Derek. He called on a Wednesday afternoon, and his voice had that particular quality it always had, careful, measured, the tone of a man who has rehearsed the conversation twice before dialing. He asked how I was holding up. He asked about Jade. And then, like it was just a natural next step in the conversation, he asked whether I'd given any thought to the house. Warren always wanted the family home to stay in the family, he said. He uses Warren's name like a key, like he had it cut somewhere without asking and tests it in every lock he passes. He'd been doing it since the week of the funeral, small suggestions wrapped in concern, soft pressure delivered with a sympathetic tilt of the head, the steady, patient implication that I was a temporary arrangement inside my own life, and that everyone was just waiting for me to realize it. I set the phone face down on the counter. Then I picked up the USB drive and opened the laptop. The folder that appeared had no name, just dozens of files, lined up without ceremony. I clicked the first one, a letter. A woman named Sasha, writing to Warren with the specific warmth of someone who trusts the person they're writing to. I clicked the next, another letter, a boy named Noah, 7 years old in the most recent photos, with Warren's light hair and Warren's particular way of tilting his head when something made him smile. I pushed back from the desk, pulled myself back. Then I looked at the financial records. Here's the thing about being the woman who tracks the household accounts. I knew every account we had, the checking, the savings, the joint brokerage. What I didn't touch, what I'd never touched in 22 years, was a Vanguard investment portfolio Warren had opened before we married. He'd always framed it the same way, easy and dismissive. That's just my retirement planning, Don't worry about it. And I hadn't worried about it. I'd respected that boundary, the way you respect a closed door in a long marriage. No reason to open it. Until now. The LLC registration in Warren's folder was 3 years old. Disbursements logged as consulting fees. Derek's name in the registered agent field, sitting there like it had always belonged. $144,000. Drained from that Vanguard portfolio over 3 years in amounts that looked, individually, like nothing. 2,000 here, 2,000 there. Consulting fees, perfectly documented. Invisible to me because I'd been gently, consistently, lovingly told that account wasn't mine to track. Derek didn't just know about Sasha and Noah. Derek built the structure that kept them hidden. He built it inside the one corner of our financial life that Warren had always kept just out of my reach. While he was calling every other week to check on the house, while he was standing at the graveside with grief arranged carefully on his face, he was the registered agent of the machine that had been running for 3 years in my husband's name. Warren's letter was at the bottom of the folder. My name on the label in his handwriting, careful, slanted, unmistakably his. He described the affair. One night, years ago, during what he called the silence between us, he described finding out about Noah. He described Derek, arriving not with judgment, but with a proposal. Let me handle the structure. No one has to know. And Warren, ashamed and cornered and afraid of what honesty would cost him, had said yes. He wrote, Gerald has something I asked him to hold. I didn't have the courage to give it to you myself. I'm sorry. I found a pen. I wrote the name Gerald Whitman on a piece of paper. I set it next to the laptop where I'd see it first thing in the morning. Then I sat at Warren's desk in the dark and waited for a feeling that never quite arrived, because what came instead wasn't grief or rage or heartbreak. It was something quieter and colder and, in its own way, more clarifying than any of those things. It was the feeling of finally understanding the shape of the room you've been living in, 10:30. Derek showed up on a Tuesday. No phone call first. Just his car in the driveway at 2 in the afternoon, and Ruth beside him in the passenger seat, already wearing the expression she reserves for occasions that require the appearance of reluctant duty. Jade was at school. I was grateful for that. He came in carrying a manila folder and set it on my kitchen table like he was doing me a favor. Ruth sat down, folded her hands, and arranged herself into the posture of a woman who is present but not responsible for what's about to happen. Derek explained everything slowly, with the careful patience of someone who has decided in advance that the other person in the room is fragile. It was a buyout proposal. 60% of the house's current market value, which in Seattle right now sits at $620,000. So, do that math, in exchange for what he called a clean resolution of the estate's financial complexities. He said the word quietly 3 times in 15 minutes. I counted. I made coffee. I put a mug in front of each of them. I sat across the table and let him talk. I signed nothing. I showed him nothing. When he finally stopped talking and looked at me with that expression that was meant to read as patience, but was actually the face of a man waiting for a smaller person to agree with him, I told him I needed more time to think. He nodded like that was reasonable. Ruth patted my hand on the way out. The moment their car left the driveway, I picked up my phone and called Gerald Whitman. What Derek didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that the boundary I'd maintained around Warren's investment portfolio for 22 years wasn't ignorance, it was trust. And the difference between trust and ignorance is that trust, once it has a specific object to focus on, becomes methodical. The moment I understood what that LLC was, I'd started pulling every thread I could find. By the time Derek sat down at my kitchen table with his printed agreement and his careful voice, I already knew about the portfolio discrepancy. I just didn't yet know how to move without making a mistake. Gerald picked up on the second ring. I read him the LLC registration number from Warren's folder. The silence on his end lasted about 4 seconds. In my experience, 4 seconds of silence from a lawyer means something significant has just shifted. Diana, he said, don't touch the accounts. Don't respond to Derek in writing. Not a text, not an email, nothing. Come in tomorrow morning. I wrote down the time he gave me and set the phone on the counter. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was what Ruth had been doing during her visits with Jade. Jade had been going to Ruth's house every couple of weeks since the funeral. She'd come home quieter than when she left, but less brittle somehow, like she'd had somewhere to put the weight for a few hours. I'd been grateful for it. Ruth had known Warren longer than anyone. Of course, Jade wanted access to that. Of course, she wanted to sit with someone who could say his name without it being complicated. What Jade had been doing, with the openness of a 17-year-old who trusted completely, was showing Ruth her phone. Not carelessly, trustingly, the way you show someone something when you need them to understand your side of a fight. Look what Mom texted me, Grandma. She just doesn't get it. Ruth would lean in and read and make the right sounds. And then, while Jade stepped away to get them both something to drink or use the bathroom, Ruth would take out her own phone and photograph the screen Jade had left open on the couch beside her. She did it twice, 2 separate visits, 2 sets of screenshots. The first time, she told herself she was keeping a record, just in case. The second time, she sent the images directly to Derek's attorney. Ruth is not a complicated villain. She's something quieter and more common, a woman who decided that her son's financial survival was worth more than her granddaughter's trust, and who found a way to frame that choice, even to herself, as protection. She wasn't running an operation. She was a grandmother who learned to tilt her phone at the right angle and told herself it was love. Derek's attorney filed the will contest 10 days later. Undue influence. The claim was that I had manipulated Warren during his final year when his health was declining and his judgment was compromised into naming me his sole beneficiary. The supporting evidence was a selection of text messages between Jade and me, stripped of context, presented as a portrait of a controlling wife who'd spent years managing the people around her. And here is the part that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. Derek wasn't doing this purely out of greed. Greed would have been almost easier to accept. 3 years before Warren died, Derek had personally guaranteed a commercial loan for $380,000. The business collapsed within 18 months. The creditors had been patient, but patient has an expiration date. The house, $620,000 in the current market, was the only asset large enough to solve his problem in one move. Warren had bailed him out twice before, quietly, the way Warren did most things he was ashamed of. When Warren died, and the will showed Diana as sole beneficiary with nothing allocated to the family, Derek didn't process it as grief or disappointment. He processed it as a deadline. The hot food he brought in the second week, the phone calls to check on Jade, the careful voice and the sympathetic head tilt, and the word quietly used 3 times in 15 minutes, none of that contradicted his plan. It was the plan. 10:37. Gerald's office smelled like old books and central heating. He led me to a small private room at the back, closed the door, and set a legal pad on the table without sitting down yet. He told me that 18 months before Warren died, Warren had come to his office alone. He'd updated his will, sole beneficiary, me, no conditions, no carve-outs, and he'd recorded a video statement to accompany it. Per Warren's written instructions, the video was to remain sealed. Gerald was not to open it, not to reference it, not to mention its existence, unless one of 2 things happened. Either I asked to see it, or the will was contested. Derek's filing, submitted 3 days prior, constituted a contest. Gerald turned the laptop toward me and pressed play. Warren looked thinner than I remembered from that period. I'd noticed it at the time and told myself it was the long hours, the stress of a difficult case, the ordinary erosion of a man moving through his 50s. I hadn't looked harder. The screen, Warren on the screen, sat in a chair I didn't recognize, in what looked like a conference room, and he spoke directly to the camera with the steadiness of a man who has rehearsed this enough times that the shaking is mostly gone. He named Derek. He described, specifically and without softening it, how Derek had come to him over years, not once, not twice, but repeatedly lobbying him to restructure the estate, keep the house accessible to the family. Route the assets through vehicles that would outlast my claim as a spouse. Derek had framed it as planning, as protection, as the responsible thing to do for everyone involved. Warren described the LLC. He described the moment Derek offered to serve as registered agent, presenting it as administrative simplicity. And Warren, ashamed of what the LLC existed to conceal, afraid of the exposure that any scrutiny might bring, had said yes. Had handed Derek the keys to a structure built on a secret Warren had never found the courage to dismantle. "I am not proud of this," Warren said on the screen. His voice was even. "But I want it on record that every decision about this estate was mine and Diana's. Derek's involvement was not at my invitation regarding our assets. It was a mistake I didn't correct in time. I should have. I'm sorry I didn't." The video ended. The room was very quiet. Something settled in my chest. Not comfort, not closure. Nothing as clean as either of those. More like the specific physical sensation of a truth that has been moving for a long time, finally coming to rest. Like a door that's been rattling in the wind for years, just gently, finally, closing. Gerald filed the video as evidence in the probate proceedings that afternoon. Here is what Derek had not understood when he filed his will contest. Under Washington state law, when a will is challenged on grounds of undue influence, all evidence bearing on the testator's state of mind becomes discoverable. Every communication, every documented relationship, every recorded statement Warren had ever made about his intentions for the estate. Derek had believed the sealed video was Warren saying goodbye to his wife, a personal thing, a private thing. He'd filed the legal document that forced it into the public record without knowing what Warren had actually said into that camera. He brought the weapon to court himself. He handed it to the only person it could hurt. Weeks later, Gerald sent a formal discovery request requiring Sasha to appear for a deposition. She came in with an attorney of her own, which was smart. She was composed and straightforward and told the truth, which was this. Every payment she had received over 3 years had been coordinated through Derek. Warren was the source of the money, she'd understood that clearly. But the timing, the structure, the categorization of the disbursements as consulting fees, all of that had run through Derek. She had believed she was receiving direct support from a man who wanted to provide for his son. She had not known the money was being drawn from a joint portfolio that Warren had spent years quietly steering me away from. Gerald informed her, at the close of the deposition, that the estate would not pursue civil recovery of the funds she had received. 3 years of rent and Noah's medical bills and the ordinary expenses of keeping a household running, there was nothing liquid left to recover, and the documentation supported her good faith. What Sasha received instead was something more durable than money. Gerald structured a formal educational trust for Noah, court-documented, independently administered, funded at Warren's established support level, and protected from the goodwill or bad decisions of any individual adult. It wasn't a reward, it was a recognition. A 7-year-old boy existed. He hadn't chosen the circumstances. He deserved a future that didn't depend on the people around him staying decent. The estate fraud referral moved to the Washington State Attorney General's office under the Vulnerable Adult Financial Protection Statute. Warren, in declining health during his final year, met the threshold. Criminal prosecution carried a high bar and would take time, that was the reality, and Gerald was honest with me about it. But Derek's name was now in a public court filing. His role as registered agent was documented. His buyout proposal, that manila folder he'd set on my kitchen table with the patience of a man performing generosity, had been submitted as exhibit evidence of attempted estate manipulation. His attorney withdrew from the case 4 days later. He came back one more time. No Ruth, no manila folder, no carefully rehearsed voice, performing patience. Just Derek on my porch in the early evening with his coat pulled against the cold and something in his face that I hadn't seen there before. Not grief, not calculation, something rawer than either of those. The look of a man who has just understood, for the first time, that the thing he was counting on isn't going to happen. He started talking before I fully opened the door. Warren would be ashamed of what I was doing to this family. Jade would never forgive me for dragging her father's name through a courtroom. All of this, the filings, the attorneys, the referrals, none of it had to happen. It could still be resolved quietly if I was willing to be reasonable, if I would just stop. Just think about what Warren would have wanted. He used Warren's name 4 times in 3 minutes. Each time, it landed differently than he intended. Because I had sat in a small private room at the back of Gerald's office and watched Warren say Derek's name into a camera, clearly and on record, in a tone that carried no warmth at all, the Warren that Derek kept invoking, the Warren who would have wanted, the Warren who would have been ashamed that Warren existed only in Derek's version of events. The Warren in that video had spent 18 months trying to make sure I'd be protected from exactly this conversation. I looked at Derek for a moment. This man who had stood at the graveside with grief arranged on his face and leverage already forming in his mind. This man who had handed a grieving teenager's private texts to an attorney and called it family protection. Warren's video is public record now, I said. You put it there when you filed the contest. I'd read it before you talk to anyone else. I closed the door. Behind me, in the hallway, Jade was standing at the bottom of the stairs. I hadn't heard her come down. She was in socks and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair pulled back, and she had clearly heard every word through the door. She stood very still, looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not quite shock, not quite relief. Somewhere between the two, like a person recalibrating something they'd held at a certain angle for a long time. She didn't speak. She didn't go back upstairs. She just stood there beside me in the quiet hallway. And that was the ending Derek had never once planned for. Not a legal defeat, though it was that. Not a financial consequence, though that was coming too. Just a door, closed by 2 people who were finally, after months of grief, pulling them in separate directions, standing on the same side of it. Derek lost every financial claim. The estate moved through probate without further interference. His name sat in the public court record the way names in public court records do, permanent, searchable, attached to him in the county where he'd lived his whole adult life, findable by anyone who knew to look. He hadn't lost because I was louder or more aggressive or better at conflict. He'd lost because he'd filed a document, and that document had forced Warren's own recorded words into evidence, and Warren had said everything. Derek had spent 3 years and $144,000 making sure no one would hear. Some weeks after the proceedings concluded, Ruth called twice, 2 voicemails, 2 days apart. I listened to both of them the whole way through, standing at the kitchen counter, with the phone held to my ear and my coffee going cold. She cried in both of them. She said she'd done what she thought was right. She said she hoped one day I'd understand. I put the phone down and didn't call back. What Ruth had done wasn't covered by any statute I knew of. There's no law with a clean name for a grandmother who asks a grieving 17-year-old to show her what she's feeling, then photographs the screen while the girl goes to get them both a drink. No filing for the specific shape of that tenderness, weaponized, empathy, used as a method of collection. The law didn't have language for it. It didn't need to. I told Jade quietly. One evening, a few weeks after everything was settled, when there was no longer any strategic reason to hold it back, and only the personal reason remained. She went still the way she does when something is too large to process quickly. Then she said, almost to herself, she asked me to show her. She said it would help her understand what we were going through. The specific shape of that Ruth framing the act of extraction as an act of connection was what ended it. Not a confrontation, not a fight. Just Jade, standing in the kitchen with that particular stillness, arriving at a clear-eyed understanding of who Ruth had chosen to be when it mattered. The calls stopped after that. Jade never announced it. She just stopped picking up. She stopped calling back. And Ruth, who had gambled a granddaughter's trust on her son's financial survival, discovered what she'd actually traded away. Her consequence was the only one that would have cost her anything real. The estate settled over the following months, the way these things do, not with a single dramatic moment, but with paperwork arriving in envelopes, signatures given in quiet offices, balances shifting in ways that showed up as line items rather than revelations. Noah's educational trust was court-documented and funded before the end of spring. Gerald handled the structure personally. It was independent, professionally administered, and protected from the decisions of any individual adult, including me. It would be there when Noah needed it, regardless of what happened between the grown-ups in his orbit. That was the point. Sasha called once, about a month after everything was finalized. Her voice was careful, the voice of a woman who has thought through what she wants to say and is committed to saying only that and nothing more. She told me she hadn't known about Derek. She hadn't known where the money was actually coming from, what account it was drawn from, whose financial life it had been quietly carved out of. She said she just wanted me to know that. "I believe you," I said. That was the last time we spoke directly. It was enough. It was actually exactly enough. Not warm, not cold. Just two women acknowledging a shared truth and agreeing, without saying so explicitly, that neither of them needed anything further from the other. I kept the house. There were mornings in those first months when that fact still caught me off guard. I'd be standing at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the light come through the backyard trees, and something in me would register it. This is still mine, like a small surprise that hadn't fully worn off yet. I'd paid the heating bill in February by deciding to sell a car. By June, I wasn't thinking about the heating bill at all. One afternoon in early autumn, a photo arrived from Sasha's number. No message, just an image, texted, without context or caption. Noah, at a school science fair, standing behind a table with a handmade volcano in front of him and a second-place ribbon in his hand, grinning the specific, unguarded grin of a kid who is genuinely proud of something he built himself. His hair caught the gymnasium light. The tilt of his head in that moment of happiness was so familiar, it stopped my breath for just a second. I looked at it for a long time. Then I carried my phone to where Jade was sitting at the kitchen counter doing homework and set it down in front of her without saying anything. She looked at the screen, a long beat. Her pencil stayed still in her hand. "He looks like Dad," she said. I know. Neither of us looked away. Jade set her pencil down and leaned slightly against the counter, close enough that her arm almost touched mine. And we stood there together, in the afternoon light, looking at a boy neither of us knew yet, and might never fully know who was, without any possibility of argument, part of the story we were both still living. Not the ending of something, not a resolution of everything that had broken and shifted and reformed over the past year, just a moment where two people who had spent months on opposite sides of the same grief finally occupied the same ground, looking in the same direction, not walking away from each other or from what they saw. A few days later, Gerald's office sent a final billing summary, along with a short handwritten note on his personal stationery. Not a legal document, just a note. It read, "Warren chose well when he married you. Take care of that house." I read it twice. I put it in the kitchen drawer where I used to keep Warren's business cards, the good ones, the ones from early in his career when he was proud of how they looked. Then I closed the drawer and started the coffee maker and stood at the window while the morning came in through the glass, slow and ordinary and entirely mine. 10:46:00, Claude responded. "I want to step outside the story for a moment and talk to you directly. I want to step outside the story for a moment and talk to you directly. Not as the woman who found a USB drive in a dead man's glove box. Not as the widow who survived a will contest or watched her brother-in-law's scheme collapse under the weight of his own court filing. As someone who came out the other side of all of it and has something to say specifically to anyone who felt a particular ache of recognition somewhere in this story. Anyone who has ever been described as reliable and slowly, quietly understood that reliable, in certain people's mouths, is just another word for convenient. Because here is what nobody tells you about being the steady one. The one who handles things. The one who keeps the household running and covers the gaps and smooths things over without being asked twice. Nobody tells you that steadiness, over time, can become a kind of disappearing act. For 22 years, I managed the invisible infrastructure of our life together. I renewed things and paid things and tracked things and absorbed things. And I told myself that was love. And it was love, genuinely, I believe that. But I also used it, if I'm being honest with myself, as a way of not being examined too closely. When you're useful, people stop questioning you. When you're dependable, They stopped checking in. I made myself frictionless. I kept every surface smooth. And for a long time I confused frictionlessness with peace. What I understand now is that there are people in the world who look at a woman's steadiness and read it as vacancy, who see someone who never raises her voice, never rattles the structure, never demands to be seen, and conclude there is nothing underneath worth accounting for, no attention being paid, no reckoning being built, no point at which the engine stops and turns around. Warren made that mistake quietly, across years. Derek built an entire financial architecture on top of it. He needed me facing forward, trusting the people around me, not looking too hard at the one account I'd been gently and consistently told wasn't mine to worry about. He needed the quiet engine to keep running. It didn't. Rule 1. Silence is not the same as peace. And trust without attention is not devotion, it's a door left open. I stayed out of that investment portfolio for 22 years because Warren asked me to, and because asking felt like an accusation. I told myself that if something were wrong, he would tell me. That is not trust. That is self-protection repackaged as loyalty. Real trust holds up when you look at it directly. Real trust doesn't require you to stay uninformed about your own financial life. If the person you love is doing right by you, your questions won't threaten them. And if your questions do threaten them, that reaction is information. Read it. I'm not saying love should feel like an interrogation. I'm saying that loving someone is not the same as handing them the controls and looking out the window. You are allowed to know what is happening in your own house. You are allowed to open the statements. You are allowed to ask whose name is on the LLC. Rule 2. Entitlement doesn't pause for grief. Pay attention to who moves fastest when you are at your most vulnerable. Derek was at the funeral. He held Ruth while she cried. He brought food the second week and sat in my living room and talked about Warren with the practiced ease of a man performing loss. He called to check on Jade. He used Warren's name in every conversation, like a hand on my shoulder, warm and guiding and steering me somewhere I hadn't agreed to go. And the entire time, the plan was already in motion. His buyout proposal wasn't something he invented in the weeks after Warren died. He'd been watching that house for years, watching Warren's career from the seat beside it, telling himself that proximity was a form of ownership, that loyalty to a brother entitled him to a share of what that brother built. This is what entitlement looks like when the social contract breaks down. It doesn't wait for an appropriate moment. It moves when you're weakest, when your defenses are down, when you're still in the fog of fresh loss and someone offering to handle the complexity feels like mercy. The warm food and the gentle suggestions and the sympathetic phone calls were not contradictions of Derek's plan. They were the plan. Comfort extended with one hand, leverage collected with the other. So when you find yourself in grief or in any crisis, and someone around you starts explaining that certain decisions need to be made quickly, that certain arrangements would simplify everything, that you should trust them to handle the parts you don't fully understand, slow down, stop. That urgency is not concern for you. That is someone positioning themselves before you have the clarity to see what they're doing. The people who actually love you will wait. The people who want something from you are always in a hurry. Rule 3. The truth is heavier than a lie. It is also the only thing you can actually build on. Warren spent years managing his fear of honesty by outsourcing the consequences to me. He didn't tell me about Sasha because he was afraid of what he'd lose. He handed Derek the registered agent role because exposure terrified him more than compromise did. He deferred and arranged and managed and kept the surfaces smooth, and then he died, and everything he'd been carrying landed on me anyway, just without the chance to respond to him while he was still alive to hear my answer. Some mornings I'm still angry about that. I think I'm allowed to be. But I've also had to sit with something else. Warren recorded a video. He wrote me a letter. He updated his will and put my name on an envelope and told Gerald to hold something for me and protect me with it if it ever came to that. He couldn't hand me the truth himself while he was living his courage. Failed him the way courage fails a lot of us, quietly and repeatedly, and at the moments that matter most. But he tried, in the broken and belated way available to him, to make sure I wouldn't be left with nothing but Derek's version of events. That is a complicated thing to grieve. A man who loved you and failed you and, at the very end, tried to leave you something to stand on. I'm not asking you to find that beautiful. I'm not offering it as redemption for what he did. I'm offering it as what it actually is, a very human kind of failure. Love and cowardice living in the same chest, and a person unable, until the final accounting, to tell them cleanly apart. What I chose to do with the truth was build, not restore. Not forgive my way back to a version of life that already had these fractures running through its foundation. Build something new, from the ground I was actually standing on. A house that is mine. A daughter who is learning, slowly and imperfectly, and on her own timeline, that you can hold two things at once, that her father was her hero, and that heroes carry damage they don't always know how to set down. A boy named Noah who has a trust in his name, and a second-place ribbon on his wall, and a mother who has carried more than most people will ever be asked to carry, and is still standing. I kept the house. I kept Jade. I let go of the version of my marriage I thought I had grieved it honestly, without performing it for anyone, and then I got up. So here is my question for you. I want you to actually sit with it. Is there someone in your life right now who depends on your silence to stay comfortable? Someone who has mistaken your patience for permission, your steadiness for submission, your reliability for an open door that they can walk through whenever it suits them? You don't have to blow anything up. You don't have to become harder than you are, or angrier than you feel. You just have to start paying attention to your own name on your own documents, to your own instincts when something is being managed just outside your line of sight, to the accounts you've been quietly, kindly, lovingly told aren't yours to worry about. The truth is heavy. I won't pretend otherwise. But it is so much lighter than spending your life carrying a lie that someone else chose for you and dressed up as protection. If this story landed somewhere real for you, share it with someone. There is a person in your life right now who needs to hear it. And if you have carried something like this, a secret that wasn't yours, a loss that came wrapped in betrayal, a version of someone you loved that turned out to be incomplete, tell me in the comments. You are not alone in this, not even close. My name is Diana. I found a USB drive in my dead husband's glove box, and it was the most devastating and clarifying thing that ever happened to me.